Good evening and welcome to the MiniMed 670G Q&A training webinar. Our guest speakers tonight are Megan Stephenson, Senior Training Specialist at Medtronic, and Lucy Casson, Nurse Practitioner at Total Diabetes Care. My name is Kieran Buckman and I'm part of the marketing team here at Medtronic Diabetes Australia, and I will be your host for tonight's Q&A session. To get things kicked off, I'll introduce you to our first guest speaker, Lucy. Lucy has extensive experience in helping children and their families manage type 1 diabetes. Currently, she works in the private practice over at Total Diabetes Care. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks, Kieran.
Our next speaker is Megan Stephenson, Senior Training Specialist at Medtronic. Megan has significant experience in the diabetes division for over 10 years, including face-to-face education with both patients and healthcare professionals. Thank you for joining us, Megan.
Thanks, Kieran.
Fantastic. Okay, let's dive right in. Megan will kick things off by discussing the new features of the MiniMed 670G.
Thanks, Kieran. This is an exciting opportunity for us to be able to introduce you to the 670G. For the purposes of this webinar, we are going to be discussing the MiniMed 670G in pump-alone mode. When I speak about the 670G system, I mean with CGM, and then when we are speaking about pump-alone, we're just talking about the pump itself without CGM. There are 3 modes to the 670G. So when there's CGM, there is SmartGuard manual mode available, which is exactly the same as the 640G, in suspend on low, suspend before low. When we talk about SmartGuard auto mode, we're talking about the hybrid closed loop facility of the insulin pump and CGM system. So tonight we'll be talking about pump alone. And as you can see, there's the components that are going to be available for now. The reason we are only talking about pump alone is because the CGM component is not regulatory approved at this point. We understand that there's a lot of patients that want to access the 670G, and so we are going to be making it available from the first week of November. And then patients can access it quickly, and we will be able to provide ongoing education around the auto mode when it becomes available and receives approval. So what's available to us now is the pump, and which looks familiar probably to most of you, looks very similar to the 640G. The meter that they actually use now is also compatible with the 670G, so they don't necessarily need to receive or use another meter. It's the same meter and same strips. The infusion sets are exactly the same and don't change. You're probably familiar with the black CareLink USB, which is used for your uploading into CareLink and is compatible with the 670G. The CareLink software we now call the CareLink system, and that is web-based. So you will need the web-based version of CareLink Pro and to access the 670G upload and reports. And it is also, the 670G is also compatible with the present CareLink Personal that patients can access now. So it's super important that if you don't have the web-based version of CareLink, that if you locate your local representative should you need to get started. So you can see here that the pump looks pretty much exactly the same. It's the same size. It's waterproof, just as the 640G is. It is it has a wireless connection to the glucose meter, the Essentia glucose meter, the 2.4 Next. The pump will come in one color and one size, and that's for the 3 ml reservoir. Accessories are exactly the same. The skins and the silicone cases are still available. And the pump is compatible with the 3 ml reservoir. It is off-label to use it with the 1.8 reservoir, although I do know that some patients. The MiniMed 670G insulin pump, like I said, looks the same. There are some changes, though, to the menu and the home screen. So what you will see is the directional up and down buttons to the side and up and down. They're the same. The back button is exactly the same, except that when you hold it down, it will go back to the home screen. So you can click it once and it'll take you back a screen like it has always done. If you hold it down, it will take you back to the home screen. The select button is going to become now your go-to button for menu access. So all the menus live behind the click of the select button. And no longer do you click a menu button. The notification light still exists and will flash should there be an alert or an alarm that the patient needs to respond to. And now there is a graph button, which is in the place of the menu button on the 640G. And that graph button now is easy access to your sensor graphs. The features of the 670G are pretty much the same. If you're in pump-only mode, it's the same as a 640G pump-only mode. You have the bolus wizard. You can provide, it provides you with a normal bolus should you need it, a square wave, dual wave. You can remotely bolus. You can access preset boluses and easy bolus. Programmed basal delivery settings are the same as in the 640G. You can still access temporary basal rates and preset temporary basal rates. The manual suspend is also the same. So essentially the features for the 670G pump alone is the same as the 640G. Where there are some, the first changes you might notice from going from a 640 to a 670 is the home screen, where you'll notice that there is no longer a bolus and basal option. The menus are now not on the front page and they're inside the main menu. The status bar, which you used to highlight on, we still can, you can highlight on the 640G, will no longer be able to be accessed on that status bar. It is now just status icons available to show you how much insulin and how much battery. Where you can get more information about status will be in a status menu inside the main menu. Now you can see there that their main menu has changed a little bit. Like I said before, to access main menu, you now hit select. And you can see already that there is a bit of differences, and it's mainly they've added another layer to the menus. There are some pretty icons against each menu inside the main menu. So you can see here that there's a bolus icon, an enter BG icon, basal, audio options, status, suspend delivery, and options. And you'll notice that we haven't had options menu before, and so that's an added menu item. So looking at the status menu, to access status information, should that be perhaps you want to see what the last notification was. It might be a patient that has come into hospital and you need to look back to see what sort of alarms had come up. It might be that you need to find out what the latest blood sugar they had or the latest bolus that they bolused. All that kind of information about the pump, any settings that are in running at that time can be accessed through the status menu, and that is hit select once and main menu, go to status. So the bolus and basal menus are now in the main menu, and you can see they're in the top 3. Generally, the design of menus is that the most frequently accessed are usually at the top of a menu. So you can see bolus is right up the top, and Enter BG is new. So previously, patients that weren't using a linked meter had to enter their BG through, or you wanted an extra BG to save into your pump, you had to go through Capture Event. So here you can actually put it through into BG and save it there. So now once we in the 640G, you find that all your setup of your bolus and basal sits in insulin settings. So now that the name has changed for that menu, and it's now delivery settings. So you can access your bolus wizard setup through the delivery settings in either the basal, the bolus menu, or the options menu. And inside delivery settings, you'll see here that now it's called bolus estimate setup. And you can see that it's now, once you go into estimate setup, you can choose turn on your bolus wizard, and then all of those bolus wizard settings will be there. If you have your bolus wizard off, you can still access carb ratio and active insulin time. And the reasons for that is going to become more obvious when we work with auto mode, when we have sensor approval. So for basal pattern setup, so should you want to set up or change your basal rates, you would go into delivery settings, either through the bolus or basal or options menu, and choose basal pattern setup, and then edit or set up a new basal pattern. So one of the things that has changed is the fact that now we don't have bolus and basal menus on the front home page. There's no ability to see a T or a D or an S against those menus when they're in a special kind of delivery mode. So now when you do manual suspend, for example, you will see a red banner saying that your delivery has suspended. Should you press the select button, you will be taken to resume delivery, and you press the resume delivery and it will resume the basal rate. Again, with the square and dual wave bolus, before you used to see a D or an S against the bolus menu. Now you will see a banner saying which mode of delivery you're delivering in. And should you want to stop that bolus, you hit select and it will take you to stop bolus option, and then you press on that. The temp basal, again, you used to see a T against the basal menu. Now you will get a banner, a green banner saying temporary basal. And the great thing about this is you'll be able to see how much time you have left in your temporary basal rate. Should you want to cancel it, press select and it will take you straight to cancel temp basal. You click cancel temp basal and you will go back to your chosen basal rate. The new menu in the main menu is options. So options houses reservoir and tubing. So it will have history, reservoir, tubing. Like I said, delivery settings will be there as well. Your event markers, your reminders, and your utilities, which hasn't changed. It still houses all of the time and date and the miscellaneous, the connections to your sensor, the connections to your meter, all of that miscellaneous information will sit in utilities, and then options is where you go to do a set change. So to summarize all the main changes for 670G, you've got insulin settings is now delivery settings, and that can be accessed through bolus menu, basal menu, and options. You have a new entry to main menu through the select button, new icons against all of the various menus in the main menu. We have a new options menu. This is a location for the history, your reservoir and tubing, delivery settings and utilities. And we have a new status location. Previously on the home screen as a status bar is now a menu on its own inside the main menu for any recent notifications and information about battery, amount of insulin, last bolus, last BG, and serial numbers. Again, another way to summarize, home screen looks a little different. You can see there also, which I forgot to mention, the lock. So when the pump is in lock mode, it's in padlock, or your menu is locked out, the lock screen, you'll see it will be noticed on the bottom of the home screen. We've discussed enough about the select button being your entry to menu, and we have new icons, we have a new status menu, our access to reservoir and tubing is through options, and insulin settings is now called delivery settings, accessed through either the bolus or the basal menu. So just as a little knowledge check, so that you're, I've just got some questions that we can answer. The MiniMed 670G home screen includes an icon that shows when the pump is locked, B, a basal and bolus option, C, a status bar that is used to access the status screens, or none of the above. The answer is 670G home screen includes an icon that shows when the pump is locked. Next question is, how is the menu accessed? A, pressing the menu button, B, pressing the select button, or C, pressing the back button? The answer is pressing the select button. Under what menu are basal and bolus settings entered? A, utilities, B, insulin settings, C, delivery settings, or D, basal bolus settings? The answer is D, delivery settings. So once we start sending out the 670G, there'll be some resources that you will be able to access to be able to teach your patients and familiarise yourself with those features, and as supporting material as well. So what we will have is a menu map for you, and that will go out in the welcome pack with the pumps. We'll have infusion set change guides for each of the infusion sets that are available. We'll have a getting started guide that will go out with the pump, but by all means, should you need a soft copy, please ask your local representative for one of those, and they can email it to you, or it should be accessible on the HCP site as soon as we start shipping. Pump start checklists will also be available should you be starting pumps on patients. And we will be putting this recorded webinar on the HCP website for you to view as well. So now I'd like to hand over to Lucy Casson, and she's going to take us through the CareLink reports.
Thank you, Megan. So before I move on to the new CareLink reports that are going to be available for the 670, just on this first slide here, it is important to note that the CareLink reports for the MiniMed 640G, the VAO and other older systems won't change. So therefore your therapy dashboard, your adherence report, your sensor and meter overview, your logbook, device settings and daily detail will still be available for these models of insulin pump. So your interpretation and methodology should remain exactly the same. And you can see those reports have come up now on the screen, which most of you should be familiar with. So moving on to the 670, as Megan said at the beginning, I can't emphasize enough that we're going to look at these reports today without CGM data. So we're going to look at them as just 670 as a standalone pump, okay? So for the MiniMed 670G at this time, there will be 6 reports available for interpretation. 3 of these across the top you'll see will be new reports, and 3 of them will be existing CareLink reports that most of you should be familiar with. So the 3 new reports are going to be the assessment and progress report, the weekly review report, and the meal bolus wizard report. And you can see there that fourth one, which is currently still in development, is the daily review. So this is presently being developed based on feedback from users, and it's planned for the next software update. Okay, so these reports are available for the CareLink system on the web and not for the desktop software version. So it's important that if you are expecting to have patients start on the 670G, that part of the patient's preparation is to, and your own, is to move to web-based CareLink software. Okay, so CareLink Personal for Patients is already compatible for 670G, and those three, the logbook adherence and device settings reports you see along the bottom, which we'll also go through today, are the ones that you should already be familiar with looking at. So the first of the reports that I'm going to take you through are the new reports for the 670G. So this one is the assessment and progress report. I'm going to take you through this, and what you're going to see is it's as I said, for BG entry only. So for blood glucose levels only, there's no CGM data there. So obviously when that is available, it will be a much busier and more detailed report to have a look at. But just for now, we're going to go through with blood glucose information only. So as you can see, this report will display really similar information to the therapy dashboard report, which you're currently familiar with the MiniMed 640G. So when CGM is available, there'll be an opportunity to see sensor data overlay in percentile comparison, in time and range data, patterns of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia, and relevant information of SmartGuard. So the relevant information for use in pump only and BG data is the statistics that you can see here, and we're going to have a closer look at them. So there's now an opportunity to compare the two periods of pump use. So what you'll see in column A here is the most recent information, but the really good thing here is that you can compare it now with the previous period, so when settings were last changed. So this is really useful for comparing, for example, a last clinic visit or remote telephone consult with your patient with their current settings and clinic results. So the information available that you can see in this example is the average blood glucose level, how many blood glucose levels are being done per day, your total daily amount of insulin, and the breakdown of basal to bolus ratio. How often the user is changing sets is a new feature which is useful to see in this report. How many meals per day have been entered and what amount of carbohydrate was entered in per average per day. And the other new feature here that you can see on this page is the active insulin time that's been set in this patient's particular pump. So moving on to the weekly review, this in the MiniMed 670 reports are very similar to the sensor and meter overview in the current CareLink reports for 640G and other previous models such as Veo. What you will see is that visually it looks a little bit different now. The currents are more vibrant, and in my opinion, they're much easier and user-friendly to read. I know a lot of people can get very overwhelmed by CareLink reports, so I'm hoping you'll see that this one is a lot more user-friendly. So it's really useful to be able to see glucose events, postprandial and post-correction trends, and it appears in 7-day segments, which might assist when determining the need for insulin adjustments based on the findings that you see in this report. So just having a closer look at this report, what you're able to see is the green shaded area that you can see is indicating a target range of 3.9 to 10 millimoles per litre. Now, the green line that you see going through the middle is set at a target range of 6.7 millimoles. And this is because when you're using a certain mode of SmartGuard and CGM, the target will be set at 6.7 millimoles. The active insulin, you're also able to see in light purple when shading after the last bolus. And this is a really good new feature that you can see how long that insulin is hanging around for in that patient. The basal rates are shown as solid pink lines, and the solid pink dots that you can see indicate where the patient has done a manual suspend. The dotted pink line also indicates where the patient has set up a temporary basal rate. So what you can see, the bolus in the purple lines or the blocks, you'll notice they're set out in two different ways, depend on how that bolus is delivered. So the brilliant thing about this report as well is that you're able to see whether it's a normal bolus indicated by a straight line, or you can see where a dual or square wave bolus has been given. And also the amount, the total amount of that bolus is indicated in purple at the bottom. You can also see where carbohydrates have been entered in orange. And if there's been multiple entries inside a 3-hour time block, then the number of entries will be shown numerically next to the total in brackets. So you can see here in the example an amount, and you can see a little tiny, I think it's number 2 with my eyesight in brackets. So there's been 2 events entered in that time. And that's another new feature from the old reporting. So where this is particularly useful for us as healthcare professionals is you're able to see at a quick glance information such as where the patients had a high blood glucose level, for example, at 17.8. They've done a correction or they've given a bolus at 4.3 where there's no carbs entered in underneath. Sorry, I'm going to the first example. And you can then see the insulin action time afterwards. But again, on the second example, you can also see a high blood glucose level, and you can see where multiple amounts of bolus were entered in. And again, those insulin profiles of action times afterwards, which you can see peaking at different times because of the multiple boluses given. So the meal bolus wizard will be particularly useful when there is CGM information in there. But for this example, we're going to look at blood glucose information only. And this can be used here to see the total number of boluses per meal within a certain time bracket. So you can see those meals broken down into different times of day. And what you can see available here is the carbohydrate ratio set at that certain meal time, if there's different ones for different times of day. You can see the average carbs per bolus, and you can also see the average amount of insulin given per bolus. So moving on, as highlighted earlier, an additional report which is being developed to gain more granular detail from a daily perspective is the daily report. So this is a test example to give you a picture of what it might look like once that's been completed. So what you've got here is total basal and total bolus information, and this will also include event markers. So for example, the duration of exercise. So see the little green man running here, and there's a shaded green area in between to indicate how long that exercise duration has gone for. So again, really useful information when we're reviewing information to know what necessarily needs to be changed or what may have worked or not worked for that patient. We've also got detailed information of each bolus, including how often the patient's been overriding and bolus wizard calculations. The other information when this is compatible with CGM will be information on time spent in range and also suspend information there too. So the next report that comes up you'll be really familiar with looking at is the adherence report. It's one of my favorites. So for those of you who aren't familiar with looking at this, then what you've got down the side is your days and dates of the time selected to review. Across the top in this first section, we've got the amount of BG readings entered into the pump on that particular day. Obviously, the sensor duration column is empty at the moment because this is just with pump standalone. Your next section is looking at bolus wizard events, or bolus events, I should say. So the first column is whether the patient's using manual boluses, and the next section is how often or how many bolus wizard events per day that patient is doing, and whether that's with food, with correction, and also you can see how often the patient is overriding the pump, something I find particularly useful when looking at adherence and patient behavior. In the second half of this page, you can see the fill events, and what this includes at a quick visual is to be able to see how often that patient is changing their infusion set, and if they're doing cannula fills, if the cannula fill amount is correct, depending on the infusion set they're using. And then obviously the last column there, this one is just for without CGM, I should say, so just standalone pump only, how often that pump has been suspended in a time period. So the next report we're going to move on to is another familiar one. You've got your logbook report. I always like this because it reminds me of when patients used to write down their blood glucose levels. But the benefit of this is obviously that it's already been highlighted into in range, high and low. So it gives you a really quick visual to look at. I think it also helps you see adherence as to how often on a particular day the patient is entering information into their pump. And for those of you who aren't familiar with looking at this, the top piece of information is the blood glucose level. The shaded black box is the amount of carbs that have been entered. And then the amount underneath is the bolus given. And if that's circled, then it's a bolus with a correction. So again, really useful to see where there's a bolus wizard event that's happened, whether it's correction only and what's happened afterwards, or whether it's with food. And it helps us work out whether we need to change basal rate, for example, or whether we need to look at changing the insulin sensitivity factor or the carbohydrate ratio. And then the key along the bottom, for those of you who aren't familiar, just helps you see what each of those icons mean and how to interpret them. So the next report here, again, a really familiar one. This is your settings page. So when you go to change the patient's settings, this is a quick glance. Also really useful for the patient that if they're uploading their pump regularly, which you should be encouraging them to do, if they have any pump failure, for example, and they need their backup settings, it's always here in this page. So what you've got are your maximums of your basal and bolus. You've also got your basal settings, so your different start times. And if the patient is using different basal profiles, then basal 2 through to 8 will also be available to see over the coming pages. And then moving across to the right-hand side, you've obviously got your carb ratio settings, your insulin sensitivity, and your BG target. So just as in summary to what we've discussed, you've got your 3 new reports across the top. So your access and progress report, your weekly review, and your meal bolus wizard report. And then there's the in progress of that daily review, which will hopefully be available soon. And then across the bottom, you've got those familiar reports that we've just gone through as your logbook, adherence, and device settings.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. That was quite a comprehensive breakdown of the CareLink reports. We've got a couple questions that came through when you registered. So how about we run through those before we finish up with this session. So the first question is, what is the first thing to look at when reviewing CareLink reports, and what changes would you make? So, Lucy?
Okay, so it's a really good question, particularly for people who can be overwhelmed by the amount of information you can get from a CareLink report. And all clinicians will work in different ways, but I actually find the order in which they're generated by your CareLink program is a really logical way to go through and break down the type of information that you want to get. So for example, you'd look at your initial statistics as the first thing, and I always look at your basal to bolus breakdown. I look at how many BGs the patient's doing per day. You've got an average BG as well there. So it's just a quick introduction to, well, how is this patient doing? The other thing that I really like is the fact that the adherence report comes before any other sort of blood glucose information in terms of your logbook. So what I often tell people is as clinicians, we always want to make changes to settings. I find it sort of ingrained in us that we want to jump in and change the insulin settings. But often, if you look at the adherence report, and certainly I was looking at a report the other day, patient behavior quite often will need to be addressed before you even look at insulin settings. So if a patient isn't changing their infusion set frequently enough, for example, then you actually don't need to do anything with their insulin doses. You need to get their behavior or their adherence with that, for want of a better word, up to standard before you start looking at insulin settings. And then just work your way through the reports, hopefully as I've broken down, albeit in a brief way today, but it sort of enables you to go through it in a logical way and work out where changes need to be made.
Right, thank you, Lucy. Next question. How about infusion sets and cannula?
So the great thing is that nothing changes. So all of the current consumables for the 640 and for the Veo will be compatible with the 670.
Awesome, thank you. Now, this one might be for you, Megan. The question is the pump approved for use in type 1 pregnancy? If not, why?
So the 670G system. Now, when I talk about the system, again, I mean with the Smart Guard facility of manual mode and auto mode. For the system, it is not approved for pregnancy. The reasons are because of the targets and the concern around postprandial hypoglycemia. But the 670G can be used in pregnancy alone. So if a patient wants to use a 670G and use CGM before they become pregnant, when they become pregnant, they can just use the pump alone and set a high and low alarm. And that's all still available just as it is for the 640G. The difference comes when the auto mode facility, and that is not approved for pregnancy.
Sure thing. Okay, so Megan, back to you again. But is there another upgrading opportunity for existing clients on the Medtronic 640G pumps?
So we have heard loud and clear that a lot of people are waiting for the 670G, and so we made a decision to provide an access program. So patients that were concerned about missing out on the 670G, they could purchase the 640G and with the promise to switch to a 670G when it became available. So that program has been going for a couple of months now and will be finishing at the end of this week. So if you do have patients that are concerned about this and are ready to purchase and worried that they can't access the 670G, that's not the case. They can, but it would have to be all signed up by the end of this week. And then moving forward from that, once they start shipping from November and it's a new pump, they will be purchasing a 670G just like the same process that they have done with their 640.
Great, thank you very much. And when will the MiniMed 670G be available?
Okay, so the 670G pump alone will be available from at the end of next week, so November the 1st. It is available. There is a lot of paperwork for people to change if they're in the access program. So the shipping will be on an individual basis, dependent on paperwork, etc. So by itself, as a pump alone, it will be available shortly. Where with the system, with the CGM, that is still not regulatory approved. So CGM is not accessible for 670G at this point.
Sure thing. We'll sit tight till then. Okay, so, well, I think you just answered that, Megan. But will a compatible CGM be accompanying the 670G?
Yeah, so for those that access the 670G access program, the program I was just speaking about that's been running for a couple of months now, that included 6 months worth of CGM. So the answer to that is yes, if you have signed up to the 670G access program. Should you decide to go on a 670 after once November comes, then when we have regulatory approval, you will be able to purchase a protector kit, which has always been available for our pumps.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Megan, is the SmartGuard algorithm different with 670G compared to the previous 640G pump?
Yes and no. So 640G pump in pump alone mode without CGM obviously doesn't have the SmartGuard algorithm. The SmartGuard algorithm comes with CGM. And in manual mode, it's exactly the same as the 640G. Where it changes is when it's in auto mode. Now, I can't answer questions around auto mode until we have regulatory approval. And then there will be some extensive education around managing that feature and better understanding the algorithm and answering those troubleshooting questions.
Cool, thank you. And can you set the temp target longer than 12 hours? And if so, how?
So the temp target refers to part of the algorithm in the 670G system, auto mode of SmartGuard. So again, that requires a lot more understanding around the algorithm, and which we will be going through more extensively when we have approval. So the answer to that is we can't answer that without all the context of clinical evidence and a better understanding around the algorithm. So we will, for this webinar, we will be, we've just discussed the pump only features.
Excellent. Okay, and how does CGM play a role in adjusting basal rates?
Again, that's another feature of the auto mode SmartGuard auto mode feature. So to better understand SmartGuard auto mode, it requires extensive education, and we will be running that and rolling that out as we get approval for CGM.
Cool. Okay. So this is another auto mode question, Megan, but if 670G is in auto mode, is it possible for individualized target blood glucose levels?
Like I said just before, it's preferred that we roll out an extensive education program than try and explain or answer these questions in this forum about pump-only mode. So we will keep you abreast of the updates around education and the approval process.
Awesome. I'm sure everyone's going to be looking forward to those. Okay, and that about wraps it up. So I want to thank everyone attending today for tonight's webinar. We hope you found it very insightful, and I hope you learnt a lot. And a special thank you to both Lucy and Megan for being part of tonight's event. Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you. Good night.